Welcome back, everybody. We're on part 3 of episode 82, not episode 85, like I said the last time. We are talking this part about WWE's version of ECW and the One Night Stand pay-per-view. This is, of course, the Wrestling with the Past segment, as you can see on the screen right now. The reason that this came about was I was going through my schedule and trying to figure out what special segments I could add for different things. And as I mentioned before, completely didn't realize that TNA was this week and next week. So I booked a bunch of things ahead of time that had to deal with the pay-per-views that were going on at the time. And right after Extreme Rules, the only thing I could think of was, let's talk a little ECW and everything. We haven't really talked a whole lot of ECW because this show itself started after the brand had already ended. So this has no real structure. It's not like Superstar Scores or the Top Rope List or anything like that. We just kind of shoot the shit about whatever it is. So anything anybody want to talk about to start off when it comes to WWE ECW?
It would have never existed without the original One Night Stand pay-per-view.
All right, let's go into that then. We'll start
Yeah.
chronologically, I guess. WWE, they always had like a working relationship with ECW, and eventually when they did the whole idea of the invasion and all that, of course we saw a lot of ECW guys come into WWE, but there never really was like that feeling of the old ECW. They just came in as essentially WCW guys. And WWE eventually had this idea of doing the One Night Stand pay-per-view.
Well, hold on. I have a question to ask about that. What came first, the One Night Stand pay-per-view or the Rise and Fall of ECW DVD? Because I've heard that it was because of it was because they released the Rise and Fall DVD and people started to get an interest in ECW that they did the One Night Stand pay-per-view. But I'm not sure what came first.
The DVD came out in 2004. That came out first.
Yeah, so it was the DVD. It brought a lot of, curiosity about ECW, and then I believe it was RVD who suggested to do the ECW, who pitched to Vince about doing to capitalize on that to do the One Night Stand pay-per-view.
Yeah, but if it wouldn't have succeeded like it did, which I guess you should expect it to succeed, the TV show wouldn't have came about, or they wouldn't have done the pay-per-view again 1 year later. So,
and it's an odd concept because you never really saw that before. I mean, WWE changed pay-per-views around and everything. We had no more King of the Ring anymore. They had brand split things going on where, you don't see Intercontinental Championship at every pay-per-view. And, like they had different things in the past, but we never really had something where it was entirely focused on another company. And I wasn't watching at the time. That was part of my hiatus where I stopped watching wrestling. But that would have been so odd for me to sit and watch an ECW pay-per-view on WWE programming because I wasn't the biggest fan of ECW. I watched it back in the day, but my biggest criticism of it was I never felt like they were anywhere near WCW and WWE. I was always WWF, and WCW was like that kind of like if you really want to eat...
They were the grungy alternative. It was a niche product.
It was kind of like if you really want to eat a barbecue, like you go to a barbecue and you have like a burger and they don't have them, so they have a hot dog. Okay, well you could do that because it's WCW and that'll be good. But then ECW just was like a salad. Like it just didn't work out to me. I never thought it was that great, and
Did you just compare ECW to a salad?
Yeah, and I swear to God, this is going to sound so weird. This is going to sound so weird because that's the grittier, crazy one. But to me, it had no substance to it. It was always something where you could tell that nobody was really like that huge star. Like that Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock or The Undertaker.
To be fair, Austin went there after WCW and WWE snatched him up shortly thereafter.
Yeah, but when you're a kid and you're watching it and you see that they're promoting like the Dudleys are like the big thing and you're like, it's just these two fat guys at that time. Like, I never liked it. So if
I don't know, man. I feel like I heard just as much the name power to like a Rob Van Dam or a Tommy Dreamer or a Sandman or even like a Mike Awesome as I would have put to any of the names that I heard from WCW.
Well, the problem that and I kind of get what Tony's saying. The problem with ECW at that time was as much as they had the talent, they didn't have the scope or the reach to really take advantage of that. It's kind of the same issue with TNA right now. Is they've got talent that they just don't know how to promote them and splay them out in a way that it makes them feel like they're that big of a star. You know.
Like what you say about like Rob Van Dam, I've never been a big Rob Van Dam fan, but to me, watching as a kid, RVD being like their top guy,
and he wasn't really, because he never made it to the ECW world title level in the actual original company in the first place.
Well, he was like one of their
TV
featured
champion guy,
one of their featured players. But to me, he was like the equivalent right now of how TNA books Magnus.
I would say Austin Aries, really.
I didn't even feel he was Austin Aries level at that time. I just was not that interested. So
I especially remember when ECW actually did their first invasion of the WWE in 1997. Yes. That Rob Van Dam was the most featured character of that whole thing when that went on.
I think it was
never my bag. You know what I mean?
I think it was because at the time, out of all of the ECW guys that were signed, I think there were a lot of eyes on RVD.
Especially in 2001 when the second storyline invasion happened, where they were actually bought out. Van Dam was certainly the biggest outsider, getting the most reaction at the time.
Didn't he main event? Wasn't he in one of the main events for a pay-per-view at one point?
He challenged, was it Austin and Angle in a triple threat for the WWF title at the time? Something like that. I don't know. Sure. Just say that. He main evented one pay-per-view during the invasion at its height or non-height.
Well, when it comes to One Night Stand, what did you guys think going into it? Because, like I said, I wasn't watching it at the time. I'm sure I would have been like, this is cool and interesting, but it's ECW guys
I was still relatively new to wrestling. By the time the second pay-per-view came around, I really kind of got viewing under my wing, so to speak. But the first one, I've only really seen highlights from, and I didn't really appreciate ECW for what it really was back then. I was still pretty young. So, but in retrospect, I think it did good business because it opened up for another pay-per-view to happen, and that pay-per-view opened up for the show to start up. And as much as people rag on it, I think it was good for bringing in and showing new characters and talent like it did before they got brought up to like a Raw or SmackDown or something like that. But for the fans of the product, I think it was a good little tribute to what Paul Heyman's original vision was and how the talent grew. It was a good tribute night all in all for a once proud sort of smaller wrestling organization.
What do you think, Peyton?
Well, I remember going into it, I just had this mindset that already I knew I felt like I was just going to be watching something foreign to me. Like I had a minimal knowledge of what went down in the original ECW, and like I said, I remember them coming in from the original invasion and of course the big invasion in 2001. But as Braden was saying, I think there was something that was more for the old school fans, and I thought I could still go into it, watch it, enjoy it, and I did. It was still a very kick-ass show. I really liked the crossover of them having the WWE stars in the audience up in the balconies.
Yeah.
I thought that was a nice touch, and something I actually wanted to see more of. I don't think they did enough of that on that show. And then the next year when WWE kind of inserted itself a lot more onto the show, I thought that was the perfect mix. Like you could have this tribute to it and then also bring in these other guys as well. And by the time the show came around, I don't want to get too much into that, but that was perfect. You could have these old timers on there, like the Rob Van Dam, like the Tommy Dreamer, like Sandman, like Roadkill, whatever that guy was. You could Balls Mahoney, and then you could even put in some of the WWE guys, like they were originally gonna have Chris Benoit in there, Hardcore Holly, the Kurt Angle, which I thought was a mistake, but. And then you can still feature all these young guys to tussle with those guys and make a name for themselves, and then also still pay tribute and bring in this audience from outside, and also have this neat show that really felt different from Raw and SmackDown.
Especially when it first started, too, right? So after the second pay-per-view that came 1 year after the first, that was main evented by a WWE Championship match of all things with one of Tony's favorite people, Rob Van Dam, in the main event.
What did you think, Miguel? Were you watching at that time?
I believe I had just gotten back into watching wrestling full time because 2004 I did take a bit of a hiatus. I just there was nothing about the product that was getting me into it. So when I got back into it, and I didn't actually see the pay per view live. I had a friend of my brother who recorded the pay per view, so we saw it on a recording. And going into it, I was curious because it felt different. It was so different from any other production that WWE had done. I mean, it looked grittier. The Hammerstein Ballroom just looked different from any other arena they had been into. Obviously the announce teams were different. It just felt different, and I was really brought into that. Coming out of the pay per view, I loved it because it felt like an old Attitude Era pay-per-view in a sense that the crowd was just so into it that it brought me in. Whether or not the action was good, I really honestly don't remember too much, but the crowd to me made that pay-per-view feel A+.
Special. It elevated the atmosphere.
It elevated it. I'd probably say One Night Stand 2005, I put it up in my top 3 favorite pay-per-views of all time, one of the best.
Oof.
Because of I know that's saying a lot, but like I said, the fact that you had such a boisterous crowd, you really haven't heard anything like that since. I mean, there are very few I can name off the top of my head that came close to that. I'd probably say, what was that pay-per-view? Money in the Bank with Cena and Punk probably comes close as far as the crowd work. But
how about the Raw after WrestleMania?
I'm talking about pay-per-views. From a pay-per-view perspective, I can't think of another pay-per-view that had that exciting of a feel to it. It really did make that pay-per-view feel
what
bigger
it had
than
on
it
its
was.
side was the tiny arena that it was in. It was in the Roseland Ballroom?
The
Hammerstein.
Hammerstein Ballroom. That's
But
a
you also have to,
ECW arena.
yeah, but you also have to keep in mind, kind of like what you said about the Raws after WrestleMania, you had real fans. This wasn't your ordinary, mom and dad bringing their kids to go see a pay-per-view. This was old school,
Local, old school male fans just yelling their asses off for like 3 hours.
I mean, come on, when the main event hit and you had that moment with the Sandman, I couldn't think of a time before that where you had an entire crowd just singing along with a person's theme song. I mean, it was exciting. It was fun. So as far as that pay-per-view, I went into it curious, and I went out of it really getting way more than my money's worth.
Well, that's one thing that I wanted to talk about was the Hammerstein Ballroom. That kind of is like the I guess kind of like the focal point of this whole thing. Like that really brings that atmosphere so much more than if they would have just had this in, somewhere in the middle of Oklahoma or something like that. Like
Let's add it in like Chicago or something like that. But
we'll talk about December to Dismember soon enough. But that's kind of one of the problems that pay-per-view had.
Hey, maybe that's going to be one of the ones that people decide next week is one of their favorite pay-per-views that should have been brought back. Yeah, they had the One Night Stand thing, and everybody thought that it was a success, so they did another one and included more WWE guys into it. And Peyton, you wanted to talk about that a little bit, about including the WWE guys?
In 2006?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some cases it worked out better than others. I mean, obviously, Cena RVD, the feeling going into that match is very rarely rivaled. The passionate biasness that was put onto RVD that night was just absolutely insane. But then in other cases, it didn't work out quite as well. I believe it was Big Show and Batista had a match that night that the crowd just absolutely tore apart.
No, that was ECW on TV. That was the first ECW of 07. I've got the card for 06's event. I think they had Taz versus Lawler.
Yeah, and then they had Orton and Angle was another match on early on the card that I thought did really well.
They had the FBI, Little Guido and Tony Mamaluke versus Tajiri and Super Crazy.
And Big Show beat the shit out of everybody after the match, to much decent reaction given who he's being watched by.
Mysterio versus Sabu, which went to an open contest.
The infamous table DDT spot. You
You had Foley, Edge, and Lita against Funk, Dreamer, and Beulah.
That was a pretty chaotic 6-man hardcore match for sure.
I did like the build up to it, the whole Foley aligning himself with Edge and Lita at the time.
I thought it was kind of random because he just came off of a big feud with Edge, and now all of a sudden he's sharing the hardcore title with him. I never totally understood that heel turn, especially like it wasn't even that long after the WrestleMania match. He's just like, I'm best friends with Edge now. We're dual hardcore champions, and then Dreamer.
What happens when you go through a table with someone?
Yeah,
I think
on fire.
I was okay with it because it played into the whole craziness of Mick Foley. You know, he could just turn at any moment.
And Edge won by spearing a woman and pinning her. So.
Yeah. Then you had Balls Mahoney versus Masato Tanaka.
Balls Mahoney versus Masato Tanaka?
Yeah.
Why the hell did they do that?
I think they might have had plans to have Mike Awesome versus Masato Tanaka.
That happened the year before that, though. So they've been like the same match 2 years in a row.
Yeah, those guys fought like 100 times. Why not do it again? It's fine.
It's one of those ECW mainstays like Lynn versus RVD. You know, if you need to do an ECW style pay-per-view, you throw one of those matches on there. And then obviously Cena versus RVD. And
that was, of course, the Money in the Bank cash-in, and everything changed and then went back to normal with that. Because then you didn't have like people only cash in the way that RVD did. You had more of the Edge kind of a thing. They moved on to One Night Stand 2007, and that kind of just stopped being about.
That's when it turned into basically Extreme Rules, where just everything's a gimmick match, and they switched it to Extreme Rules for more PG name. One Night Stand, double meanings there.
And honestly, they can't keep doing One Night Stand multiple times, so it makes perfect sense to go to Extreme Rules. It took them a lot longer than it should have, I think.
2 years is how long it took, 2007 to 2009.
Now, maybe it'll be a little while before they stop having Extreme Rules matches at Extreme Rules, but I already bitched about that last week and everything.
And then the actual show itself.
Yeah, and then that, ended up leading into the show itself because, as we said earlier, the success of that, got people talking. And for all we know, maybe they had discussions about this beforehand, and that was just kind of the thing that solidified it. But WWE ECW, lots of people absolutely hated it. And the thing that they always say is that it's not ECW. And really, was it ever going to be?
Yes and no. To me, you can kind of split ECW into two areas. You've got the first 6 months of ECW from June to the December to Dismember pay-per-view, and then everything else after that. What I'm going to say about the first period of ECW is it felt like they were trying to be ECW, but filtered through a marketing filter. Like you can tell looking at it that they were trying. It's almost like if somebody explained what ECW was to Vince, and Vince just kind of did it to a T, verbatim. Like, for like the Sandman, for example. Like, it's like somebody explained, like, this is the Sandman. He's anti-gimmick. He's, he drinks, he smokes, he beats people up. So we're gonna have him every week come out and beat up a stupid gimmick. ECW was about pushing the boundaries when it comes to women and sex and all that other stuff. So we'll have a character who's an exhibitionist, and she'll come out and she'll strip tease. It's about hardcore matches. So we'll have Extreme Rules matches that didn't last too long, given what would happen. A few that was 07, but it didn't last too long because I think they started realizing we can't have Extreme Rules matches because people get hurt. I mean,
it was after the infamous Holly table back cut, basically, is when they started toning them down.
So my point is that they actually did try to be like ECW, but you can tell Vince didn't get it. He didn't understand what the essence of ECW was. He heard what people were saying about it, and he did exactly that, and it just didn't work. And obviously the big contention was he had total control of ECW. Even though he said that Heyman would be able to create and do stuff, you knew out of the gate Heyman was not going to be able to do the stuff he wanted to do. And
on top of that, pushing Lashley at the end of 2006, Heyman had a totally different idea of what he wanted to go on.
Heyman wanted Punk.
Yeah, he
Heyman
wanted
was
to push Punk as the franchise guy of that brand, and well,
yeah.
everybody else said otherwise. So that's what led
As
to him.
Yeah, and as far as ECW after that, from then on, it's basically just became a third brand. I mean, they phased out the originals. I mean, heck, their big feud going into 2007 was a feud between Bobby Lashley and Vince McMahon. So that tells you how much they cared about the
Oh, I
promotion.
mean, you don't remember the classic feud between the New Breed and the ECW originals?
Well, like I said, that was them trying to phase out the originals. By
Yeah,
by
and
having
then
these.
drafting them to other brands like the Sandman on Raw. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
that felt really weird when the draft when it comes into play with ECW. If you guys remember this, ECW always was taking away anybody who kind of seemed like they fit there, and they were thrown onto Raw or SmackDown where they completely didn't fit. And then they would take somebody from Raw who was like a very low card person, throw them over to ECW, and everybody would be like, "Oh my God, ECW is getting screwed over. They just lost somebody like a Sandman, and he's doing jack shit on Raw." And at the same time, we got this Johnny Nitro guy, like that kind of a thing.
I think the logic behind that was we're taking guys who have some semblance of marketability and we're gonna milk it for all it's worth. So we're gonna
Right.
take these guys like the Sandman, we're gonna put him on Raw, and we're gonna see just how much we can get out of him before we just decide to throw him out. Conversely, and this is gonna tie into something I noticed with ECW. ECW, in my opinion, towards the end, at least for the title, kind of became the apology belt. And what I mean is you started seeing a lot of guys who were long-term wrestlers who had done all they could in the mid-card, but you knew were never ever going to get main event status. So we're going to put you on ECW and we're going to put the belt on you as kind of an apology. Because you started to see guys like Chavo Guerrero, Matt Hardy, Mark Henry,
Kane.
Kane, Christian, all these guys who, in WWE's mind, they'd gotten all they could out in the mid card.
3 of those would actually go on to win the World Heavyweight Championship later on anyway, that were former ECW champions. And on top of that, it gave guys like Punk and Morrison decent stuff to do as well.
Well, Morrison was by accident because
I know the whole Benoit incident.
Beep.
Yeah, beep. I know that whole thing went down, and it had a play in his push.
It helped Swagger too.
Yeah,
Swagger was an ECW champion as well, and arguably probably his best title reign he's ever had.
Quite surprised that Sheamus never won it. Because
he wasn't on there for that long though. He debuted in the June of 2009, and he was on Raw by like October. He
was too busy winning the WWE title.
Yeah, that to me was a huge shock because they were pushing Sheamus, but they weren't pushing him that far. And
it was not like a Lesnar 2002 push or anything like that.
And I was sitting there going, they're building this guy up to the ECW title. Like that's going to happen by the end of the year. He's going to win the ECW title. And then it was just like, now he's kind of on Raw. Okay. And shit, now he's fucking winning the WWE championship. Like, I had thought the ECW championship, when we're talking the topic of this, I was very flexible with the ECW championship, and I criticized a lot of the people that were on the brand, but at the same time, I was always sitting there going, you know what, this would be the perfect belt to give to somebody like Rey Mysterio. Somebody who is not good enough. It
was always a mid-card championship.
Yeah, it's the upper mid-card title is what it should have been, and I wanted so badly for them to give it to like Rey Mysterio and Bob Holly and I can't think of like Matt Hardy at the time. I thought that
you probably thought the same thing for Christian too, right?
Yeah, Christian.
The title was a good fit for him at the time.
Yeah,
coming back.
Yeah, when he came back, it was just okay. They have to give him the ECW title. That'd be perfect for him. And like, I never was interested in like what kind of how they would do like with the Bobby Lashley thing. Where Lashley, I was never a huge fan of Lashley.
I thought he had a lot of potential, but.
And I thought they missed their opportunity. They gave him the ECW brand, and they tried to build that around the idea of Lashley as the champion. But
They
Lashley
missed
to
the boat
me,
with the King Booker feud. He should have stayed on SmackDown and went
yeah,
after the World Heavyweight title at that time for sure.
right. He should have stayed an upper mid card on Raw or SmackDown, and in the process, you could have kept the Bob Hollies and the Big Shows and the RVDs and CM Punk and the younger guys like that, as well as the older veterans, and kind of built the brand around that. They eventually did go on to do a whole younger people paired with older people with NXT, but
Miz and Morrison as a tag team got to shine on ECW. I think if it was named anything else, people would not view it as horribly as they do.
You beat me to that point, because that's one of the things I was going to bring up at the end was, and we're not quite at the end yet, but one of the things I really wanted to say too about that was everybody complains about this, and they have the same complaint. They go, "This wasn't ECW." It never was ECW. They just took the ECW name. It's the same as how SmackDown felt like WCW.
Now wait a minute, though. If you think about it, it was ECW, because if a guy wasn't working out and was floundering in the mid-card in the WWE, they sent him to ECW to get some development, a little bit shine put on him, and when he was ready, they came back to Raw and SmackDown. How often did that happen with the original ECW?
Yeah, that is a really good point. I didn't think about that.
Just blew all your minds.
Yeah, you know what?
Oh!
You're stacking up points on top of my points.
Not so much. I mean, I don't remember that. Did they send people from WWE to ECW?
Some guy's career got Brockus or whatever got his career killed by being destroyed by Taz on TV. WWE never pushed him again after that atrocity of a match. I remember something like that going on, but other than that, I don't really remember too many other people being on ECW that were actually from WWE's roster, other than Lawler.
Don't feel too bad for Brockus, though. I heard he got his life together, and now he wrestles in TNA as Rob Terry.
Oh, yeah, right.
No. I mean, it wouldn't be people that you would recognize as WWE guys. It would be someone like Al Snow, who was just a guy who was flying around doing absolutely nothing and would get sent down there for Paul Heyman to work with and figure out what he needed. And then you know what he needed?
Very true.
He needed a mannequin head.
Yeah, that's all he needed to get over.
I think the problem is that the way they built up ECW was that it was a fans promotion. It was something that the fans could really latch onto.
The original, yes.
Yes, and when they brought it back, you could tell instantly that this was not made for the fans. This was made for WWE. They weren't going to listen. They weren't going to listen to you. They weren't going to listen to the fans. They were just going to do whatever they wanted. And I think that's what hurt people who criticized it for not being ECW, is that it didn't feel like something that belonged to us. The same way.
To me, it was made to give the veterans something to do and for the younger guys to get really polished before they moved on to a bigger and better show. And to me, that does a lot for business. I mean, a lot of guys ended up moving on to big success. Like, I think, who would you say probably got the most success out of ECW? Like Miz and Punk
or Sheamus?
And Sheamus too. Yeah, I keep forgetting. He had such a short stint on ECW. But Miz, Sheamus, and Punk all moved on to win world titles. Mm-hmm. So I think it did its job there. As I said, it was called anything else, people would not shit on it because it wouldn't be taken in the name of a promotion they felt was so very close to them. And was just something, somewhat. I would like to say, an NXT currently that's a little bigger and more promoted, that had a little bit more star power as well, with some established veterans who just went to a lower brand, basically.
Yeah,
it was that kind of breeding ground.
If they would have went with something kind of like if Raw is the red brand and SmackDown is the blue brand and ECW was kind of like the yellow brand or whatever, if they would have gone with something, keep that same idea of it's a third brand. And you've got even like the same roster, even just a mixture of some upper mid carders and some one or two kind of like late in the game main event people like a Mark Henry or a Big Show, or I guess you could even say like a Bob Holly, and then younger guys and all that. It would have been completely different if they would have taken like that Velocity name. Or just made something else up, fucking WWE Smash or some crap. Like, they go with the whole SmackDown and Raw or some other kind of nonsense fucking Impact word that people like to throw around there.
WWE Undercooked.
Yeah. then we would have a different story here. We would have people that would say, that's the C brand and it's not as good as SmackDown, which
But
isn't
hey,
as
at
good
least
as
it
Raw.
developed some pretty good talent that
Right.
got brought up to bigger and better things.
Right. That's why everybody's complaining about the ECW thing, and that's only because they wanted it to be ECW. And fair enough, if you market it as ECW, you would expect it to be ECW, the way that SmackDown wasn't marketed as WCW. So people weren't complaining saying, why aren't we just seeing a show of the Buff Bagwells and the Booker T's and Jeff Jarrett and all this other kind of stuff? One of the problems that I want to get into with the ECW thing was they kept switching authority figures, and they had like Armando Estrada as the general manager.
Teddy Long was doing both shows.
Yeah, the ECW talent exchange that they did, which I actually
Didn't they
thought
have some
was
chick like for a while too.
Tiffany.
They had Tyron
Drew McIntyre's ex-wife.
Now, I actually thought that she was better than Armando Estrada.
No, I can't agree with you on that.
Really?
I thought that she was just bland. Like at best she's bland. At worst she was just insufferable in terms of being an authority figure. To me, she's on the level right now as Brooke Hogan is in the as the TNA Knockouts leader.
I didn't think it was that bad. I actually thought
she was
that
just
Armando
absolutely
was
forgettable. I mean, like I said, when I was thinking of her, it was just some chick. Like even if someone was bad, I can remember someone like a Mike Adamle. I can't remember this girl at all.
Like if Adam Lee would have went over, that would have been fucking great.
Adam Lee originally started off as an ECW commentator, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. He took over.
Other than being an interviewer.
He started as a like a guy in the audience with a microphone talking, and then he went to a commentator on ECW, and then he went to a Raw GM.
Yeah.
But he was amazing.
Mike Adamle.
Yeah, that kind of that led into some weird things.
And their one pay-per-view. I mean, it's been the elephant in the room for the entire time we've been talking. We never really touched upon it all that much. December to Dismember 2006. The only, other than the 2006 One Night Stand before the show went on the air, the only ECW brand exclusive show when the show actually existed for a pay-per-view.
And to this day, the lowest performing pay-per-view in WWE history.
And I'm not surprised by that. They went in with 2 announced matches. Eminem versus the Hardy Boys and the Extreme Elimination Chamber match. That was it. That was the entire card.
And how could a main event like that not sell when you've got guys like Andrew Martin and Bob Holly? Test.
Oh.
Yeah, and Lashley. And then you had Big Show, who was the champion, Van Dam and Punk. Which
now you when we're talking about this December to Dismember thing and the Extreme Elimination Chamber match and all this kind of stuff, there was one other aspect I wanted to talk about here that I didn't want to get buried under some other things, and that's TNA copying this. The Extreme Elimination Chamber match. That's just the same as what they have at Lockdown when the weapons come down and everything like that.
Although, to be fair, TNA had that first with Lethal Lockdown.
Oh, it's the same kind of a thing, though. Like they...
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, they both stole it from the Tower of Doom from WCW.
Or War Games. I mean, Lethal Lockdown's very heavily War Games influenced. I mean, there's no doubt about that either.
Right. Now, that's an idea that sounds good on paper, but I have never seen it actually implemented where I thought it made sense and was good.
I think the problem is that it visually just looks hokey. You've got this cage with a bunch of random items stapled to it. It just looks ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's
you
have
the
a
type
bunch
of
of
thing,
puppets fucking hanging from the top of the.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that I would have
cage.
done when I was playing with my wrestling figures as a kid. I would have made a match where fucking there's chairs hanging from the fucking ceiling and all that.
Miguel puts up a very good point when you see the wrestlers scrambling and trying to and then if they're punching out somebody, that person stays lumbering by the ropes just so they can wait for the person to get the fucking weapon down from the ceiling or whatever, and they stay there waiting to take the weapon shot. Yeah, it looks fucking ridiculous.
And TNA had the idea that when WWE officially disbanded everything like that they were going to do it. And they were going to have their own one-night stand with Hardcore Justice. Which was fucking shit.
That was depressing.
That 2010 show was horrible. awful.
Although I'll give him credit for actually bringing New Jack onto the pay-per-view at the end of that Team 3D matchup when the Gangstas popped up. I'm like, all right, that's something WWE would never have done. Bravo.
WWE would have had better sense than to bring New Jack into this.
Most companies have better sense than to bring New Jack on a live pay-per-view feed.
Most
Not
companies
TNA,
have better sense than to have their completely out of it champion wrestle in the main event as well. But
Well, he was actually the completely out of it challenger. Sting was the champion during Jeff Hardy's Intoxicated.
he was?
Yep. He just lost the title the week before that, and that was his rematch clause.
Oh, I don't even remember that. We went through that. We went through
Because wasn't their original main event for Hardcore Justice supposed to be Van Dam versus Jerry Lynn, but Lynn couldn't make it or something like that, so it ended up being like Van Dam and Sabu.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I'm trying to remember what else happened on that show. I mean, it's really, I guess, that forgettable.
Didn't
Hardcore
Foley
Justice?
wrestle?
No, I believe he wrestled before that. Was that before? I think that might have happened right over when Foley. I think Foley wrestled Flair. I think a couple weeks before that.
Yeah, that's right. Like, it should have been on that show, but for some reason they had it on Impact or some shit like that.
That would have been a great main event because that was actually a pretty solid TV matchup. Foley
Raven
versus-
and Tommy Dreamer, Team 3D against Axelrod and Balls Mahoney, Rhino against Spike Dudley and Alice Snow. This is a winning card here.
Yeah, I remember watching this, and I think I actually reviewed this. I think this was one of the first things that I reviewed for TNA. And they're like, oh, like the second match, or the first match, I'm looking at Wikipedia right now, FBI against Kid Cash, Simon Diamond, and Johnny Swinger, and I was just kind of like, I actually don't recognize a couple of these guys. And then they were like, the second match comes out, Too Cold Scorpio, and I'm like, oh, I know Too Cold Scorpio, and they're like, and C.W. Anderson, and I'm like, the fuck is this? I was just like, what am I watching here? Like, C.W. Anderson was just like the fucking.
That was the problem with it, is that they couldn't even get the major named ECW stars.
Stevie Richards with the rest of the Blue World Order against Just Incredible.
Well, no, they couldn't even get the real the real meanie, because apparently they either they couldn't get him at the last minute or something, so they had to get a stand-in. So it's not even the real Blue Meanie.
No,
Yeah, the Blue Tilly.
At least they got Simon Dean to actually be Nova.
It's just like, to me, that was the epitome of like what I don't like about TNA.
And,
we'll get into
the most horrible thing about that too is WWE owns the name ECW. They're trying to do an ECW pay-per-view, but they can't fucking use the name at all. So they're calling it like EV2 Extreme Version or whatever the fuck.
Oh yeah, that was the EV 2.0, I think.
They actually, I think, were. I think they might have gotten sued or at least threatened by WWE because somebody actually noticed that they were trying to, like, it's not ECW, but it kind of is. So they were like, you guys need to ease up on that because we'll sue you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll stick Jerry McDivitt on you.
When they're like, oh, this person was a great competitor back in that Extreme promotion that we don't own. And like,
we'd love to show you a video, but instead, here's Dixie Carter.
Here's C.W. Anderson. Like, that was just fucking crazy. And I really wanted to make sure that we talked about that. I wanted to use that as a transition to part 4, but I also want to talk about some other ECW stuff too. We mentioned real fast the New Breed, and there were a lot of people that were on ECW, WWE's version of ECW, that could have had potential, and I actually think kind of got screwed over a little bit. Mike Knox was one of them.
Yeah.
I thought that he could have been a good mid-carder. Never a world champion, but he could have been like...
He had a chance on Raw well after his tenure on ECW too, and they didn't really do anything with him there.
Yeah, they really, like, they kind of dropped the ball with some of these people. Not a Balls Mahoney. I mean, he wasn't going to go anywhere at that point. And not a Nuncio or...
They're at the tail end of their career. They're just sort of there on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
Notoriety's sake.
In terms of Mike Knox, by the way, I think the problem was that he felt too much like a Gene Snitsky or a Heidenreich. He felt like too much of a generic big man with a beard who went around
burly fucking heel that there's at least 5 guys like that before him. Yeah.
It really wasn't until the end of his run in WWE where he started like saying like the very profound like soliloquies or something. Like he was kind of doing like a what's his name?
He was trying to do Sandow before.
Yeah, Sandow.
Yeah. Beard
and
and
it
all.
it started to, but I could tell that this guy wasn't going to be a big star. I think the only thing that got him over was the fact that he was with Kelly at the time.
And his
Um,
beard.
in terms of people I thought were going to be big, two guys that pop into my head are Elijah Burke and
Mhm.
Marcus Corvon.
I
Ah,
actually never saw anything in Marcus Quirvon, and Elijah Burke. I could see that he had some talent, but I never thought he was actually really going to go
No,
anywhere.
he didn't. Elijah Burke was terrible.
I thought that he
You weren't a
wasn't.
fan of-
Let me tell you, everyone thinks CM Punk never had a bad match in his career. Watch his match with Elijah Burke.
I never thought that Elijah Burke was somebody who, he was like an HBK or anything like that. To me, Elijah Burke was somebody who could have been that guy that kind of like stays around for a long time, kind of like a Finley.
He would have been he would have been what Kofi Kingston is now.
The heel
And
version of
I wouldn't
Kofi
even
Kingston.
I wouldn't even say to that extent.
Not
but
even a
like-
Shelton Benjamin. I know that they both have like athleticism and ring skills that are way better than Burke's ever were, but
Yeah, Shelton
my
I
point.
think is even above him.
I think
Me-
personality-wise, he had a great personality. I mean, to me, he showed that
he
with
had
the Pope.
charisma, and his
Yeah.
Pope gimmick in TNA really showed it as well. But he just could not get it done in the ring. He's pretty fucking green, and that was really the only hindrance about him. But he was never able to polish up, and I think that's a major reason why they let him go.
But like I said, Corvon, I thought could have been a big star. I mean, he had the look, he had the charisma. I remember him from his days in
Monty
the Alpha
Brown.
Male. Yeah, so I
TNA.
was completely behind him. I was like, yeah, awesome. And then obviously his family issues, he had to leave wrestling.
He had a cup of coffee run in the WWE, and being a former TNA guy, I didn't see him making it too far. Honestly,
And I'll say it right now. I kind of dug Kevin Thorne's vampire gimmick. I really shouldn't, but I did.
I liked
Because
Ariel.
Oh, of course, yeah, no doubt. I liked her better in TNA.
Speaking of Kevin Thorne, apparently I just checked his Wikipedia page not that long ago, and I didn't know this. He he has wrestled in Europe under the name Seven Thorne.
Oh God Almighty,
Um,
that's awful.
when it comes to Marcus Quirvon, I think the only thing that we really are missing out on is his theme song.
Watch me
Going
do
down,
what
down,
I do.
down, always smooth. Watch me do what I do.
That was awesome. That needs to be an
No,
outro.
that pounce was so good.
His pounce was awesome. That's like a.
Yeah, I'll give you the pounds. I'll give you that.
Did he even call it that in the WWE, or did he call
Yeah.
it something else? Yeah, he
No,
did.
they call it the pounce. Yeah,
that was one awesome fucking shoulder tackle.
I'm with Miguel. I think Marcus Corvon had a chance. I really think they thought a lot of him too. I think he was the most featured person of the new breed, and there was a few weeks where he was brought on to Raw where he was featured really heavily too. I think he had a big future, and it's really a shame that he was not able to continue. And if he ever does find the time to come back, I think there's still maybe enough time in his career to just get a nice little mid-card run at some point.
I think him and Burke share the majority of the spotlight for the new breed. I mean, Kevin Thorne was way too fucking ridiculous to be kind of like the featured guy. He was just sort of there, and then Stryker was like the comedic relief as the teacher. I wouldn't
Striker's
say he
very
was-
underused in WWE
Yeah,
right now. I
yeah.
think,
But I would say Burke was featured just as much as Corban was in that group.
It started as Burke because it seemed like it was Burke because he was the one who had the mic skills, but by the end of that whole thing, man, I'm telling you, they were really pushing Corban.
Yeah, and basically family issues basically got in the way, and then that was it. Because as I said, his run was not even a full year with the WWE. And I think that's the last thing he's done in wrestling since. That's years ago now.
I don't think he's done anything.
No,
of note.
I don't think
he's been doing the home life.
I'm surprised TNA didn't try to reach out to him at one point. I mean, given the history with them, I
They
don't know if
might
they
have.
have a burned bridge with him or anything like that. But I was actually shocked that he never made a return back. Because I'll be honest, a Monty Brown return to TNA, I think could work. I think you'd have not only the nostalgia pop from old school TNA fans, but I wouldn't be surprised if the guy still got it.
Well, you know what? They might have. We don't, obviously, we're not privy to that information. It could have been the same family issues. He might not have been able to do that either.
No,
True.
he turned down the bigger job to go help out with the family. I could see him definitely turning down the smaller one for the same thing. So
other than the way that we talked about the TNA thing and we talked about New Breed and all that other kind of stuff, when it comes to WWE's version of ECW, I honestly view it in the grand scheme of things like this. Good theme song for the opening credits. Don't Question My Heart. I liked that. it was a good way to
Still
boost
standing.
a lot of different people up and to give. I mean, if Benoit would have actually worked, that would have been a really good asset for them. And if they would have had um, the ability to continue a lot of that kind of stuff, like they did build up quite a bit of guys and give older guys that last kind of thing that they could do. Somebody like a Finley or a Jamie Noble or whatever, they were never going to amount to anything above what they got into with those kind of different promotional boundaries. So ECW was a good way to utilize them. As we mentioned before, if they would have gone by anything other than ECW, I don't think anybody would be complaining about that, and it would just have been, well, that wasn't as good of a brand as Raw and SmackDown, and that would have been it. Kind of the way that people look at Saturday Morning Slam and Main Event and Superstars as, well, they're not really Raw and SmackDown.
Yeah, but in a way, ECW did introduce new talent, though.
Mhm.
Whereas, like a show like those two, like a Main Event or whatever, just featuring guys
Right.
that are cast-offs from Raw and SmackDown and don't really have the for whatever reason, out of a fucking 3-hour show, you can't feature those guys on Raw.
In the
So
grand
they put
scheme
them
of
on Main
things,
Event.
I think ECW is a massive success compared to Superstars, Main Event, and Saturday Morning Slam.
Yeah, it was a bigger NXT with actual like upper mid card star power is really what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Can
And I
I?
give it-
Can I?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I just want to add one last thing. How much of this do you guys believe? Because I've heard this rumored on and off that the reason they used ECW, the ECW name, was because Vince wanted to actually, that he purposely wanted to kill the ECW
Mhm.
name because he didn't like the fact that people were chanting ECW all the time, or he didn't like the fact that ECW was getting as over as it did and it wasn't his product. So I've heard rumors that one of the reasons why ECW was done the way it was towards the end was because he wanted to actually kill the mystique that ECW had. And this actually leads into something, one of my problems with the way WWE ran ECW is it kind of retroactively made the original ECW look bad in a way. Because I remember when ECW was first starting to bubble up in 06, and a lot of wrestling fans were behind it. They were like, "Oh, ECW is this great thing." By the end of ECW's run, people were even bad mouthing the old ECW promotion. Like you had a lot of people online going, "Oh, that old ECW is nothing but a bunch of smart marks and people bashing their heads over. No ring psychology. It was the worst place to go. I hated it. It was terrible." It really did kind of, if Vince was trying to actually kill the mystique of ECW, it worked because a lot of people were bad mouthing it, and since then nobody really talks about ECW anymore as a promotion.
Yeah,
I think that kind of just shows how fickle a lot of fans are.
Yeah, I
Because-
think that's something a lot of internet smarks would like to believe. I think the reason
Yeah.
people don't talk about ECW anymore is because it was over 15 years ago.
And on top of that, even if Vince hated ECW to the core, if he knew he could make fucking money off of it, which he knew he does, he likes money a hell of a lot more than he hates things. Okay, let's not try and
Mm-hmm.
That has-
devoid from that.
I've
Get
always
away
thought
from
that the
that.
situation probably went down like this. One Night Stand happens because of the DVD, as we were talking about earlier,
Rise and fall.
and they go, well, you know what, let's do the One Night Stand pay-per-view. And then that goes pretty well, and they're like, well, let's do it again. Let's try to do a whole big show about ECW. We'll try to, make as much money, dry the well up as much as we can. And then it got to the point where they were like, well, now we're running out of, we don't want to have all these ECW guys around. Like, they're a pain in the ass backstage, and they're really not giving us much value for the future. We need to start looking forward to building up other people. So
it
let's
gave them
add
the
more of them.
opportunity to do so.
Yeah, let's add more of them into here. And then, well, we can't just have new people, so let's add some older guys, and let's do that. And then it naturally progresses like that, partially because it was never going to be their priority. They are always going to be worried about what's happening on Raw more than they are on SmackDown and everything else. So they kind of push that off to the side, and they go, well, that's a good enough solution. We'll just do that. And then it gets worse, and it gets worse, because that's what happens when you neglect something. I mean, look at, when you clean a house. It gets dirty after a while. You get dust that cakes up and everything. So the same thing happens with ECW. And
before you know it, Zeke's your champion, and you're going off the air and switching to NXT.
Well, before you know it, you get to the point where you go, this really doesn't serve much of a purpose anymore. I think we should just go ahead and take all these guys and put them on Raw and SmackDown, make them sink or swim, and let's just do a new talent thing. But if we're going to do that, why call it ECW? And we're not going to spend a whole lot of money rebranding a whole nother thing and do a third show and call it something like a Velocity and then add a fourth show with NXT. Let's just go with the NXT thing and, cut it off like that. I think, if anything, they probably, if ECW would have been a success, they would have figured out a way to keep it around.
Which makes me wonder, if ECW was not going to be their main priority and they really wasn't going to put much effort into it, why did they go out of their way to push Paul Heyman out? Why not just let him have that? Like, say, here's the promotion. Here's some guys we're not using. Here's some of your old guys. Go ahead, do what you got to do. As long as you don't go too far, you're okay with it. Could it have been that? Could it have been that they were afraid he might end up going too far with
Absolutely.
it?
Mm-hmm. Why relinquish control when this is such like a micromanaged organization?
Fair enough.
And they would also lose out in the library that they could use for their precious DVD sets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, they were always going to have it. Once they owned ECW's name, they were always going to have that library.
Well, I kind of got all my thoughts out here. So, final thoughts, Miguel?
I'll give them credit for the first 6 months for trying. It was goofy, but you could tell that they at least tried to make the fans happy and tried to at least make it kind of like ECW. Everything else after the December to Dismember pay-per-view, it was just a third brand that just happened to be named ECW.
Braden?
I will always credit it for getting CM Punk to the main roster. That is all. And also helping, develop some of the other stars that would move on there to bigger and better brands and do good things for their careers. The Miz's and Sheamuses of the world, they started off on... not them.
They were teaming with Goldust and...
But they started off debuting on TV for ECW, and look where they are now. Well,
actually,
maybe to a lesser extent Miz, but, that's not entirely his fault.
Mike?
Well, the DVD was a good idea. It was an excellent watch, nice to reminisce. Even the one pay-per-view, great. I thought it was cool that they put that together. And then they realized, hey, we can do this. And from that point forward, they just spent so much time thinking if they could, they didn't stop to think, hey, maybe they shouldn't. Yeah.
See what it
Maybe they should have thought about it.
Do you think that, and I'm kind of breaking off the whole final thought thing, but do you think that maybe the better thing would have been screw the whole idea of using the old ECW guys and just go right into like the new breed and everything?
Yeah, did they really think they were going to feature a show around Balls Mahoney and Roadkill?
No, but if they were going to go with the title ECW, you can't start off at least without having some of the old stars. That would have sunk that would have sunk them, in my opinion, because I think part of me thinks they went with ECW because you're right. They could have named it anything else. They went with the ECW name because
it drew money.
It was hot at the time, And if they'd have started ECW without the ECW stars, it would have killed them. People would not have given them the next week or the week after that. They really needed to.
Well, one of the things that I want to do in a future episode of Smack Talk, or maybe a special thing instead of Smack Talk itself, I work with Jim Molyneux, the ECW referee, and I've talked to him multiple times about, outside of other business things, about doing Smack Talk, and Jim's open to do it. So, we've talked, just the two of us, about different ECW stories and all that other kind of stuff. So if you guys are really interested in hearing from Jim Molyneux, any kind of stories about the way that ECW was behind the scenes and, what was this wrestler like and what happened with that story and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, we did everything from talking about whether that was true with the whole Chris Jericho says that Paul Heyman owes him money. I mean, there's lots of different stuff that we can speculate about.
Spoiler alert, it is.
We can speculate
Paul
about
Heyman
this stuff.
owes me money.
But Jim, being the referee there, he knows a lot of stuff. So stay tuned, everybody, because I'm going to try to get Jim to go ahead and actually do the show.
Man, I think he probably worked for $5 a week, and Paul Heyman probably still owes him money.
Probably. He always tweets everything, retweets all the Smack Talk stuff and all that. OTW Wrestling. So if you guys really liked this segment and you want to hear more ECW stuff, we're obviously not going to do this all the time. But if you really liked it and you want to hear more and you really want to hear what Jim Molyneux has to say, leave comments, tweet stuff about it, and let everybody know. So we'll see what's coming along that way. Next up, we are going to have the final part of this episode. And it's as much of a disappointment as the way that WWE ECW was handled in a lot of ways. TNA's Slammiversary 2013 pay-per-view predictions and spoilers.
Good night, everybody. I'm not going to be here in the next part.